조심 도장인 남바디 산제신도 우와예 조근한다 쉐바 쇼이다 그러나면라관이 다야미 세다지 거로 단디체 Gimmicky let Chababo Carolina, Nami Mignon Gawadis, Ra. Go at the Migi Village Chababo, Nami Mignon Gawani, and then I'm going to Chimla Tachi, Chimla Soda Cheshi. Sawa number Michel Bandila Mirishanchi, say. Oma Dinis, Ribatan Gawata, Jidemba Lechim Mirides, the Ra. Miguel Chobo Carolina, and I'm Mignon Gawade, that is Sungar. That direction says, you do Daniel Suji, Rashi, and then Namji, and then Namji, Namgi, do Chimla Soa, and then Namji, Namgi, to Chilla Soata, Chimla Sodachi, and the Castle, Chishi. So did you Daniel Sumji? Any Rashi and then Namjet never good to Chimla Sola, Taji Longe, any Longes, Longejas, Longejas, our number Sheva, Sawa number Misheva delay, any cast a Miriba G. Ribatan, Jidana Gavichero.
So next comes the showing how it is contradictory to assert that first accepting that there's something that is a creator of virtuous and non-virtuous karma, and then asserting that that creator does not experience the results of that is contradictory, and that's given in verse 241, where it says, "What is more illogical than that the attributes should always know how to construct homes and so forth, but not know how to experience them? Since such a contention contradicts reason and conflicts with worldly convention," here just says worldly things, it is the world, it is utterly incorrect. What is more illogical than to claim that the attributes whose nature is pleasure, pain, and equanimity know how to construct homes and so forth, but do not know how to experience these amenities? It contradicts both reason and, she has convention, but I think it just means the worldly usage.
Yes, right.
No.
Oh, yeah, that didn't say. That data by Lechebo, down Nami Sao in Bacabanis. Oh, Chawatan, then Taba me, Kunduson la Chawa me, Chawa meba, Metasung, Dami Tela, Damela Chikas, Serabagi, Takona Lechebo. Nami Samabo Iba, she Dodo, Satakona less Chevapodan, and Nami Waba, Nami Chevabo in Potato. Tetanaya and Teina, and that about Merides. Chevabo in a Chevi Gujan, Chevi Gujan to Kalang to such a Chevi, and Gujan de Jebu Kalang Kukure, Chevabo in a Chevi Gujan to Kalang Grede, Chava Mishaba, Chevabo Miribishero. Yana Gujan said, "The old castle, Vincent was seeking General. Chawa Mishaba Chababo Miri Bushero. Chababa Latena Shawa, the Chababa Chawa Latena Shakoida. Rola so Chawa and Dambala, Ani or Taba Medes, and the Chawa Dana Taba Udosona Chawa said. Rola so Chawa and Dambala Taba Mede.
So next, the Vaisheshikas then would assert, and the next comes a rejection of that if the self, a permanent self, creates karma and experiences the maturation of that karma, rejection of that contention. So the Vaisheshikas say, the self alone is the doer or creator of actions and the experiencer of their maturation. Answer, if that is so, the self cannot be permanent. And then the first part of verse 242 says, the active is not permanent, and the ubiquitous or omnipresent, something that is everywhere, is actionless. If the self is an agent, it must be accepted as causing action. If it does not perform actions, it is unsuitable as an agent. That which performs actions like coming and going is not permanent, since one must admit that it differs from before, from how it was before. Something the whole of which is everywhere all the time does not perform activities such as coming and going. Since there is no place or time, it does not occupy.
I say that. Nani tamjaji you kundu and songala dong chawa medes. Nani tamjaji you kundu songala dong chawa medi. Any te money be you did maybe said, did money be you did maybe city. Any Yendi Chawadan Travi Da Yodo Sena Chaw may be Dani Meba Nagi Method of Sumbe. Damela Chechi, any Dala Gavaga Miria, Damela Chechi Migawa Ridi, Dameto Bechi, Tamjela Troy to said.
So then, again, something the whole of which is everywhere all the time does not perform activities such as coming and going. Since there is no place or time, it does not occupy. And then the Vaisheshikas come back and say, well then, an actionless self exists. And the reply to that is, the actionless is like the non-existent. Why do you not prefer selflessness? Since an actionless self is as non-existent as a sky flower, why do you not prefer selflessness? It is worth doing so, for understanding it frees one from all fears.
That did also. That didn't call then you were still covered that she is. Kasagata Yova Zimba, Chijilo Yimba, Databa Koala Tower Missiba, Tabuka Taka, Miri Batava, Dame Buchoa, Zedukaba, Chen, that Tambo, Kasagata Yova Zimbi, in Zimba Chijilo Yimba Tena. Lala Kundu Song, Lala Gibu something. And of course, Lala do them chi tong de, share of Jemaba tong, or dig it up, Carasores and Kasakita to Timber dancing the Lochilo in Batas, Dayuna, Rangun watch, Kasakita Yuna, and each or Rangun or like Chabama tong go ale. Ani to the Suyina, Rangun or Chabama tong go ale, and Tongo ale, Chedabana. Chandra saw Lala Kundu Songatos, Lala Ludi, Ani Ludi racing, Nangatara, Anukundu Songatola. Jibu Lala, do Tromada, Lambochella saw Li Chujun the Sabu, Lujanshik Tonde.
So then next comes the rejection of the idea of a self in general, of a real self, showing that the apprehension of the self of a person as if it existed, misapprehension of the self of persons, or apprehension of a self of persons as if it existed, as existing is contrary to the way things are. And then, so that's the first topic that comes in this portion of the text. And then that's given in verse 243. And then the introduction to that is, it follows that the conception of a self of persons is erroneous, is contrary to the way things are, since the self, if it existed, would do so by way of its own intrinsic character. It should appear without differences. And then the verse begins, some see it as ubiquitous, as everywhere, and for some the person is the mere body, or the size of the body. She introduces that. Some see it as a mere particle. The wise see it as non-existent. And then the commentary continues, some, such as Vaisheshikas and Samkhyas, see the self as existing in each body and as being ubiquitous like space. Others, such as Nirgrantas, see that which has a body as proportionate to the size of that body, such as an ant's or an elephant's. And then there's a half verse here which says that Nirgrantas assert that the life force is large or small, like the size of the body.
Oh yeah. Lala duzam chikta thongde lala temisebe lala ani duzam chikta thongde owi te khona ni da chiji malo ba izara ko te chiji lo ba isa marisa owi te khona ni chiji malo ba thongwe sherab jenji dame ba thongwe da rang ngo yena ani mudi tawa 무대반이 다 예매 다기 되서 다와 타자바 타자 아니 매바 주래 타자바 매주 당하라고 뭐예나 대다 매바 주래.
So then again, others such as the Nirgrantas, these people see or consider that the person or self has a body proportionate to the size, or that has a body proportionate to the size of the body, the physical body, like an ant's or an elephant's. That the life force is coextensive with the body. Nirgrantas assert the life force is large or small, like the size of the body. Others, unable to accept this, see it as a mere particle, but those with wisdom that perceives the suchness of things, doesn't necessarily mean functional things here, but things without distortion, and here the text missing the negative particle should be jinjimalokpa, see it without distortion, see the self as non-existent. And then it says, indeed, if the self existed by way of its own, its intrinsic character, the Tirtika's views would not differ, meaning that, and that's not in the version of the text that we have, but she supplied it, I guess. And so it's saying that if the self existed by means of its own intrinsic character, then there wouldn't be any difference among the various non-Buddhist philosophers' views. It would just appear that way.
Oh yeah, da ngoni na mudiji an da de so da wa ta ba ta da yo menju me ba ta menju ro che da ba la kho la ta ba me se ba ne da ba la ju cha me ani cha me ju ba yin za kho la ta ba me ju de la da la ne ba kha la yu ne me ta ba kha la yu de na kang ge da ba te la ta ba me so哦，那国外看呢看呢，大把开两把台了，安尼他把米里说是，哦，米里说是，那把了，看完你这说起，那把看了是也是，我看了那把没得，那么光白，安尼他把看了。也看他把看了也把看了也没把提起来是大把了咱们就小把就把没把咱们光白他把看了也把没把提起来是一张在那看他把在那他把没说是的。
So next comes showing that it would be impossible for such a permanent self that's asserted by these non-Buddhist philosophers to exist in samsara or to become liberated, or to become liberated from samsara. And so, and this is given in verse 244. How can what is permanent be harmed or injured, or the unharmed be liberated? Liberation is irrelevant for one whose self is permanent. For an opponent who asserts a permanent self, attaining liberation is irrelevant or impossible. How can that which is permanent be harmed by dangers and so forth in samsara? And how can that which is unharmed in samsara be liberated by subsequently meditating upon the past? It cannot, for these very reasons.
Oh yeah, that is 타비가서 다 칼레를 밀바니 가데 다제 차유나 남의 양반 미리신 디니 리방에 와라 냥아 대시 차지 냥아 냥대 대주 냥아 대주 세자 준 가데 다제셔와 안에 라운도 랑경 오니지나 안에 가사 그다 매냥바데 미리신 안에 타바 토바야 미리바 미리바 당진디 주비지 안에 나도 좀 그 주마냐 봐 요새 다지야 랑경이나 연전전 탐제 아니 나기 태권한지 리바 나기 태권한지 다음에 비 태권한지 리바 다음에 또 봐. 다음에 또 봐. 당신 방빙 해와래. 당신 방빙 해와래. 당신 방빙 해와래. 양아랜 다와 주시 주버리 주에 타바더반지 다음에 봐开朗와 차오.
Next shows that it's inappropriate to hold the idea of a self, the real self, within the context of liberation. And this is given in verse 245. If the self exists, it is inappropriate to think that there is no self, and false to claim one attains nirvana through certain knowledge of reality. If the self exists by means of its intrinsic character, it follows that thinking there is no self is inappropriate and that attainment of liberation is not feasible, since the basis for the conceptions of a self is intact. Moreover, the contention of these amazing or strange, one can translate this, strange people, who assert that the self exists, but claim that through ascertaining knowledge of reality, one abandons conceptions of a self and thereby attains nirvana, would be false. Therefore, those who seek liberation should accept selflessness.
Oh yeah, that's it. 다 남의 좋아 제주 가봐 세지 맞아 자식 가지 좋아 된原因 좋아 가지 좋아原因呢 되는가야 매번매 믿음 봐라 간도와 되니랑시写这些 다다유나 아니 탑이 내가나 당진 탑이 내가나야 당진을 주바 타외 지네 다유나 탑이 내가라 당진을 주바 타외 지네 가지 남의 장 나 매장 안에 조위 기고 대바 주바 여반이도开来나 다 매장 아니 가서래 조위 기고 이모발에 조위 기고 대바 주바 여반이도 开来나 조위 기고 된르니 뭐야 코비트나 매배 그냥 매바타 생어에 가져 좋아原因에 되는 거야 매바 매세매다 제가 현당 믿음 봐라 제가 현당 믿음 봐라 현당 제가 현당 믿음 봐라 장배랑 경우에 시와 맞추와 어서래 믿음 봐라 장배랑 경우 시와 랑경우 시와 맞추와 칸통와테 랑경우 시와 맞추와 칸통와테 라시 시자와 셰비셰르서
Next comes showing that a rejection of the idea that the liberated person, that liberation by means of selflessness is substantially existent or substantially established. So there's a rejection of that. This comes in verse 246. Fearing the absurd consequences that conceptions of a self would occur in the liberated self state if the self exists, one might assert that though there is no self, there is a real liberated person. And that verse 246 says, if it exists at liberation, it should be non-existent. It should not be non-existent before. It is explained that what is seen without possessing anything, she doesn't give the possessing there, without possessing anything is its nature, and nature is emphasized here. It's the nature of the thing. It follows that there must be such a real liberated person previously to during samsara, because its character, isolated from any associated factors as perceived by unmistaken awareness, is said to be its nature. If there is no self during liberation, it should not be asserted as existing during the cycle of rebirth either.
Oh, yeah. I can't say.
So if there's no self during liberation, then one shouldn't assert that there was a self that existed earlier during the time in which a person is cycling through the cycle of rebirth in samsara.
That's what Damela Chapapamia Tela. Dame Gaji Dame and Disha Gajimala Chapatavia Meba. Diana Judo Jumiriba, Jajajong Oni, Tabakona Tabata. Tanya Betaje Bondu did it Damba, Senata, subject to that dinner and Tambo Damage and Disha Gajima, Chapatavia Mebani. No, Kade Meda Chanani, Tadu Taso Chiti, Dini Kade Danjuna, Sulan to move him, Sujam Jones. They made any Dujakaji achievement unto the they made any Ujenji Duchi, Dujakaji achievement unto Janam, Giamata Zibe, Giamata Zibe, and the Chabrachuak in your Mare Sena. Gursenas. Midaba Chabi to the top of Mitete, Midaba Chabi to the top of Mitete. Midaba Chabi to the top of Mitete, Tedana Toma Meban and Gidio Home, Gidio Home, Tadu Zashi Sonam, Chi, the Mebata. Kade Midaba Chanani, and Midaba in a Chabi Jan Chavisero. Say, got academy, Meda Chanane, Tadu Jaso Chidi, say.
So the next comes to showing that getting rid of the fault that might obtain with respect to selflessness, the fault of annihilationism or things being annihilated. So the opponent might ascribe that fault to the proponent of selflessness, saying that this entails the fault of annihilation. And this has multiple subdivisions. The first of these is that though there is no self, the fault of the fault of this entailing that constructed things that are momentary, created things that are momentary, are annihilated. That fault doesn't obtain, and that's given in the verse 247, where. Here it says 247. Someone might assert if there is no self, and here the text is corrupt. It says denme, but it should be dakme, as the translation reads. If there is no self, created things whose nature is to disintegrate moment by moment would discontinue, meaning here be annihilated or cease completely, discontinue because of disintegrating as soon as they are produced. And then the answer is given in the verse where it says that if the impermanent is annihilated or ceases to exist, how could there be grass at present? If indeed this were true, no one would have confusion either. It says ignorance, but it's confusion, or that's the way we're translating that. Understanding impermanence to mean annihilation, or she has discontinuation, the stoppage of things totally, is unacceptable. If it did, how could there today be fields and grass whose continuity is beginningless?
Oh, yeah. 다 미다바이나 주의샤바이노 시비 따바디 가디 담바 주바나 담바 주나 아니 가사 술라양 아니 때문 미중 왔다 가다 술라양 때문 출라양 때문 뭐죠 담바 주나 유장이 제스며 봐이자 가사 술라양 때문 미중 왔다 미다베체르 대신도 대화당 대자 소장 미중 왔다도 때문에 뭐 좋아한다. 안에 차상 시간이 좀 매우 좋아하다로.
There wouldn't be any grass or fields, for if impermanence means annihilation, the discontinuation of the continuity of the lack of continuity of things, then whatever is impermanent would have the defect of ceasing to exist, of stoppage. If the view that whatever is impermanent is completely annihilated, discontinues were true, it follows that no one would have confusion, because confusion is impermanent. It also follows that pleasure and desire could not occur either.
Oh yeah, 다니와 나연아 주도그 주미를 많이 했습니다. 나니 여바 주나수 샤라 주와 나주라 샤라 내외 나주나 샤라 나바 지바 나 나니 여바 주나수 세 다여바 주나 여바 주나양 도와 타다 주비게 아니 주를 메자바타 나니 여바 주나수 뭐지 누구 메시다 니마 차발라 매장 누구 메시다 니마 차발라 매장 추세단 다와 차발라 추당 사별의 누구당 누구당 아도 안에 매매보라 매매보래 안보소 수주 안보소 수 주신 권한을 주한 나와 주라스 비신을 매봐와서显了呀나와 주신 비신 마상와라 매봐왔다 显了 나봐 지봐야 나왜 체르세 다 인자 가르르서나 기도 대체래
So thus, then the next point is that if there was such a self, then it would be improper, incorrect for it to be the cause of the production or cessation of things, the things being developing and then disintegrating or stopping. And so that's given in verse 248. Even if the self existed, if there was such a self, then she's got form, but I'm translating that as physical things. Physical things are seen to arise from other causes. To continue or endure, one could translate that, to endure by virtue of others and to disintegrate through others. So it follows that even if the self exists, or if it was to exist, it would not be acceptable as the initiating cause of things which are seen to arise exclusively from other causes. Fire arises from the contact between sunlight and a fire crystal, water from contact between moonlight and a water crystal, and a sprout from a seed. And physical things such as the sense organs from an earlier stage of the fetus. They continue because of other factors. Fire keeps burning because of the fuel and so forth. And just as it does not burn when there is insufficient fuel, they disintegrate through other factors. The self cannot exist, for if it did, it alone should produce all these kinds of effects, and it doesn't.
Oh yeah. 다 됐지. 인자 주창와라 아니 대부 중화당 주마상와라 아니 대부 무중화 인자 아니 다여봐 말이스 나여나 아니 주창 마상 삼제가 대부 타다 째고 그래서 어디 인자 나여봐 미리데 난 주지 나여봐 미리데 되나 아니 대권에 대부 타다 째고
So the point here again is that if there was a self in the sense that it's posited by these philosophers, then it would be able to produce all of these effects without any other causes or conditions being present, but it doesn't. And when things like fire arise, fire arises when there's a complete concatenation of all of the necessary and sufficient causes for it to arise. That's when fire occurs, not from some other cause that's irrelevant to that production of the fire. And the same thing in terms of its disintegration. This occurs only when conditions are met which entail or bring about the disintegration, the stoppage of the fire. And that being the case, this kind of self which is posited by these philosophers cannot exist. It's irrational to hold that. If it did exist, then it alone would be able to generate all of the various results that are seen in the world.
Oh yeah, that 되게 제라. 다 제제 탐제. 어느 거 미다와 코나를 태봐. 따발라 미다바. 제제 탐제 오 미다와 코나를 태봐대. 지달 사변 제와라 누구 제와 제주와. 대신 미다 탐제는 미다 달래 중화 주. 강기차 따발에 저거 미제바. 제와 미스바 티세. 지대나 지다 사변 샤와를 때는 누구 제와 저와 투신투 지다 사변 샤와라 누구 샤와 제주와 세세 미다바 탐제장 안내랑기 누리추와기 미다바들의 중화 그와 미다바 탐제제 랑기랑주 미다바의 중화 주에 누지 깨지기 제가 샤바 남라 따바다 안에 따바다 샤바기 과감 매번에도 다시게 탈로마기냐 따바다 샤비냐 디와 말해서 제가 제가 샤바나 따바다 뒤에 따도 대바다 야나 뒤에 샤바가 과가디와 말해서
So that next shows, this is showing how that the generation of things and the things that they generate is only viable when when created things are impermanent. Only impermanent created things can function as the agents which generate things to arise or be the objects the things that are generated in this process of production. So that's given in verse 249. Just as the sprout, which is a product, is produced from a product, the seed, similarly all that is impermanent comes from the impermanent. An effect cannot arise from something permanent, and thus, just as the sprout, a product, arises from the seed, which is a product, all that is impermanent comes from impermanent causes. Therefore, created things undergoing production and disintegration moment by moment can never be permanent nor discontinue, meaning they cannot be permanently fixed, nor can they be totally annihilated, such that they have no continuity in any way whatsoever.
Oh yeah, that is it. 他也比大家帮助对的点把台了，大家的现在帮助对的点把台了，看见我就吧，天那切把没就行，看见我到就吧，天那大把没就了，是，我这个他看见我就吧。就吧，看见我就吧，天那切把没就行，是的，对些难了。对些你对些别，我拿来了，对些拿了，大家给多起头，大家给多起头是大家给你吧，多起头，今天给这话讲罢了，讲把爸爸听，天天讲，今天给这话讲把爸母。讲把听，看我等进这话穷啊，人啊，家人都等进，等着开脸吧，让我那么住吧当，确实这门给得刚说了，拆下来等了，带我当大把这么几天，等着开穷人我听了，家人都到把掐的。抗日前呢，如果那时候只有我决心叫我就把听了。有些个人话没去报去，看见我都觉得天那大把没去了，天那七把没去了，是我天那七把没去行是有些个人话没出去，看个些如果今年300斤我到不了去完了，300斤我都到不了去完了是，300如果我都拍完的呢，300可能跟我到不去了，300刚把去完一张，大把跟人话也没去完一张，看见我到就把天那。大把民主了，
So next comes showing a demonstration, and in brief, in summation, the way in which one eliminates the idea that things are eternal or annihilated, the two views of eternalism and annihilationism from a conventional perspective, just even from a conventional perspective. And here the verse then says, this is verse 250, and I'm translating this differently than she does, but I'll just do that. Since created things develop, there is no annihilation, and because they cease, there is no eternalism. So I've changed functional things to created things, and instead of arising, develop, and there's no annihilation of them. And because they cease, there is no eternalism. Since resultant things like sprouts arise and are produced, the cause's continuum is not in danger of being annihilated. I'm sorry, there's an introduction to this verse, which says, back at the top of 225, page 225, the thunderbolts of permanence and annihilation, which strike and destroy the relationship of cause and effect between created things, are driven off to a distance by the wise with the mantra of dependent origination. She has mantra there, didn't she do it? It's like a spell, mantra or spell, vidya, or spell of dependent origination. Here, dependent origination entails that things are not objectively existent. They don't exist from their own side. They're not established by means of their own intrinsic nature or by means of their own intrinsic character. These things are autonomous, standing on their own. They don't exist in that way. Rather, they're merely dependently designated. They're merely established dependently. So this mantra or spell of dependent origination destroys these ideas of eternalism and annihilationism. And then the verse says, since created things develop, there's no annihilation. And because they cease, there's no eternalism. Since resultant things like sprouts arise and are produced, the cause's continuum is not in danger of being annihilated. Since the seed ceases once the sprout has been produced, the cause is not in danger of being permanent.
Oh, yeah. That David, on the Shabbat, Tiki Duchela, Kangatana Kanchuma, Teniri, Tenimi, Tele Shabaya, Maiji, Tiji Chemi Damayi said, that Secretary, or you can call it Dana Chumi, or Dana Chumi, or Te, Kangatana Kanchuma, Teniri, Tenimi, 대니 매시 여기 수만 나시죠. 어디 주진 겨울에 주는 뒤 잡아가 냐와야 매스 따바 도바를 주는 뒤 따비야 냐와 매바데 따데 집집바를 가나 되는 강조와 대니리시 대니미 텔레 샴바야 매시 대지 샴에 담아예스 다주의 집바체.
So then the evident proof text to support the statement about the verse above is the basic verse on wisdom, which says half a verse here, which says, whatever has arisen dependently, whatever has originated in dependence, that is not identical with that. Meaning that the cause is not identical with, if something that arises as an effect can't be identical with its causes, and yet it can't exist in a completely autonomous fashion, independent of the causes that gave rise to it, or that based upon which it exists. So the relationship then is interdependent between the thing that arises and the causes that gave rise to it. They can't be collapsed into an identity, and they can't be established absolutely separate from one another because of that interdependent relationship that they have.
Oh yeah, 시소주 된 두바 타예비 안에 다자 본주 타예비 타예 다자 본주 때는 오세. 니르메와 코합니다 동하다 미상 공부 공부이 다 공도 샤바기 안에 다다 치질로도 준비 여보 안에 미다바다 동하다 다음에 봐 공부이 다 준대 다외 다자자 현재 다다 타야 방세 다 공도 아니 시로와 그 준대 다외 다당 아니 준대 유래발라 마도바게 아니 당신 현재 다다 나도 다외 아니 다다 타야 방 시자원의 수수자바고
Then, so that half line from the basic verses on wisdom, Madhyamaka Karika says, that shows the way in which one can avoid the extremes of eternalism or annihilationism, even just from the conventional way of examining how they work, the way things work, and from the conventional perspective. And then there's the here Master Gyaltsab Je says, I say, and what follows is the concluding stanza, through familiarity with meditating on impermanence, suffering, and uncleanness of samsara, abandon the limitless views of the self, both the innate and those she has imputed by tenets, I would say imagined by philosophy. So the views of the self, there are two types of these. There are the notions of the self which are simply created by philosophers, are imagined by philosophers, and posited based on various sorts of faulty reasoning. And then there's the inborn, sort of innate is the way she's translating that, or born, the notion of the self which is born together with us, connate with us, and both of those are to be gotten rid of through the meditation that's given above, and then the chapter title.
뭐야 다들 두위스 제바고 전수는 저 주제는 저 공부 시간 님 보시죠 나가고 공부 담아 시죠 저도 저거 주의죠 제 주의죠.
So then the title follows that.
나라지 주지 받더라 주지 비저 받더라 뒤든로 가봐 이거 뒤든로 가봐 류슝샤바 천년제바 다들라 뒤대로 가봐다 루제 가봐 뒤대로 가봐라야 숨 대몽 가봐 저위에 다바 가봐 다다도 가봐 담보라 대몽 가봐라 마음 제로 가봐 대와 제로 가봐 마음 지라 가봐 담보 마음 제로 가봐 될래야 시체를 가라 마음 봐 오버여 봐 내가 땜봐 마음 봐라 오버여 봐我也把蛋白了，也把那把蛋白提两个吧，再种了才到我他娃，最终再说人呢，没到吧没事吧他娃，是打谈不得了，忙吧的我不远了，按你卡说的，那把蛋白太了，他可是说的，忙碰了他有朋友嘛也带我没。看起天气忙完吧，天气忙完要嘛也是他提出的，他日节忙完给他，然后就明白的，日节上午他忙完说腿忙完他哪里是，他参嘛给哪呢？我说他这把给马主办打把没把日出去当是他说的日出去当是。大病我没把明的是大病我没把明的是明的腿大把有些人是大病我没把明的腿大把有些人你在这去的去了当三本月讲是去了当三本月讲如果当没多少高个性没见了人家叫我明白有钱也把78年了搞不见了，人家没接不得了，俺有钱也不接，俺干啥大记住那个人是，这样对，现在这样推也行是，推什么呢？那边我不拿，在他那边打把赢了是，推什么呢？那边我不来，在他那边打把赢了，俺 되니各지 타지 유담지제 싸워쳐와 인호 시에서도 야되버.
So next comes the exposition, 11th chapter or 11th exposition, which is a rejection of time, the way to meditate on this, develop one's understanding and meditate on this rejection of time. So here the large number of subject headings in the outline. Won't go through all of these in detail, but the first of these, the basic topic is the rejection of real time, the idea that time is really established, real, and that has the exposition of the chapter, the text of the chapter, then the title of the chapter is given. So the first of these has showing the rejection of the time having a character of being substantially existent, substantially established, and so that's the first. And then that has multiple subdivisions as well. The rejection of past and future. The rejection of past and future has 3 subdivisions. The first of these is rejection of a substantially existent future. That has multiple subdivisions as well. First comes showing that showing the various problems that would arise if the future existed as a thing, as a real thing. And so that's given in verse 251. The verse, just to present that first, the verse says, "The present pot and the past pot do not exist in the future pot. Since both would be future, the future would not exist." But as introduction to that, first comes the assertion of Vedantins and other proponents of time, permanent, the idea of time as a real thing. Though they would say, or they could say, though it is correct to admit that a permanent self does not exist, since it is not established by either direct perception or inferential cognition, here's short for perceptual or inferential cognition, permanent things, functional things, she says, are not non-existent since there is permanent time. And then the reason they give for that, though water, manure, seeds, and so forth are present, one observes that sprouts, flowers, and the like are not produced at certain times, but are produced at others. From this one can infer the presence of another cause, which is time. Although it is a permanent entity, a thing different from the functional things which exist in the 3 times, it is revealed, that is, time is revealed in terms of instants, moments, brief spans, and so forth, these different periods of time.
呀，他这没在北京站可的是，我了在他这边推远了，没搞了，他妈没把房子先生把去。他带了毛没推，准备天都毛没碰把关了，嘎巴掐了，是，我这里是了，毛碰了，他大约朋友嘛人电话没sai的了，嘎巴掐，这刚说的嘎巴掐了，提醒都嫌你了呀，笑话掐我，对了，刚说的毛，在那毛比推准备推到毛比碰把关呢，俺那打嘎巴掐个意思。电信都俺那电话他查到你了也写我笑话，看这是是啦，他那毛比碰把了，他大约碰把也把明星是毛碰了，他大约碰把也他大约朋友嘛人是的，他那毛比碰把了，他大约碰把也把明星，提前呢，大约碰把也把毛碰把也没话人是朋友嘛人电话没是，大约碰把也没把他是，提前天意我呢，其中就我对那位是，在碰把人天意人呐，到你这次天意人我呢，其这是中就给其中就给中就我对那位，俺你推敲我他话当啊。这个推呢，就是没事被吃了，是吧？他话当这个推呢，就是没事被吃了，是干了。军长看给钱呢。看起天气忙我把天气忙我要把原因是看个起军产天呢来我当他大话你忙我推忙我比准备推说呢 마음이 뒤서 타외 대세 마음이 체를 아니 마음이 원이지 좀나 아니 마음이 죽어라 원지 라시지는 마음이 죽어라 대단하 뒤숨자야 마음이 죽고 라시를 좀나 뒤숨자야 마음이 죽을 거야 내 다다 미세버 죽어라 대화다 다다와야 미세버 죽어봐 대단하 간도야 마음바 샤 미니베 마음원이 제 예바마인 바주로 대지 마음 야마인
So the answer to that is given as follows. This is unacceptable, for if time were an entity different from, or here had a character which was different from functional things, it should be perceived, but it is not so perceived, is not perceived like that. That has already been refuted, and that's up above in chapter 9. In this context, the refutation is made taking a future pot to represent future time. The same should be understood with respect to the other two times, present and past. And then the verse is given again. It follows that the present pot does not exist in the future pot, nor does the past pot exist at that time. For if both existed at that time, time would be disrupted. Past, present, and future would be confused, since things which are to occur later would already exist at an earlier time. Also, at any one time, another cannot exist. For these reasons, since both the past and present would be future if they existed at the time of the future pot, they do not already exist at that time. If the future of the future existed by way of its own character, its own intrinsic character, it should be future. If in that case, since all three times would have to be future, there could not be any past or present. And if that were so, the future itself would not exist, since it could not be posited as future in relation to anything.
Oh, yeah. 다 가로 뭐니 봐 문제로 오체 단위와 딜량 가봐 대라 같이 시바 마원비 뭐 마원 라연나 마원 단위 여강 등이 마원 단위 두여강 진이지다 대화 주루 지대 마원비 분바 아니 마음이 분발라 예매바 민지에서 마음 가서 대일 분발대 대일 분발 마음 분발라 예매바 말에서 가르래서나 마음이 마음이 차대 대일 분발대 마음이 마음이 차대 예배 녀매도 세나 가대 분발시바 마음이 아니 분비 티대 분발시바 마음이 아니 분비 티대야 마음이 마음바래 연아 아니야 연아 아니 내 분발대야 마음 왔다 마음이 분비 뒤에서 마음바 대일 분발 마음바대니 원이 출세 세가라 가대시바 내점에 마음 라 연아
So then next comes the rejection of the response that the opponent might give to this, and that's given in verse 252. They could assert the past pot is not altogether non-existent in the future pot, since there is a part of it which has not yet come into existence as an entity that has occurred. There is no error. And then the answer reply to that is, if a disintegrated thing exists as a future entity in the future, how can what is future in nature become that which is past? So then the commentary explains that if at the time of the future pot, the disintegrated pot existed in the future as a entity which has yet to come into existence, or had a character which has yet to come into existence, it would follow that the past pot was future because of its being by way of its own character. And that's own character there is the way I would translate that. That which has not yet occurred at the time of the future pot. If this is accepted, it follows that there would be no past.
No, that cause ta lo se tu se de na dewa ma yin ba ta mao bi chawa ye de mao bi dan yi de ba ye ba kan yin ba de chi ta dewa chuo de ga yu se mao de ba ye ba kan yin ba de dewa chuo ba kan yin ko de ba ye sa ani 破明的吧，是吧？日本台单的毛分别我，毛吧，点都开了那样，毛这么多开2个月，那把就，后来那把就过来说的。
So then there's, if you accept that, what has gone before, it follows that there would be no past. This would necessarily be so, for how could anything that was real as a future in character become past? It is contradictory. Moreover, by virtue of this reasoning, if the future in relation to the pot is asserted as being real, it must be accepted as being only future, which undermines the contention of the opponent here.
他今天看说的，他这是中呢，这就对呢，这是中呢，他台湾嘎巴天了。看个钱呢，毛王大队那一句话，第一钱呢，他觉得毛王你没事，对毛王缺单了还是他这种，毛王比我远了。毛王比碰比我他觉得，毛王比我远了，毛王比碰比我的他就过来，他就得做他，看个钱，我这种就开了，不是看个钱，毛王比再进我大队那个就提起了我，
Then next comes the showing that if something was substantially established as a substance, then it would necessarily entail that it be present, present thing, a present phenomenon. And so this is given in verse 253. Because of being future in nature, a future functioning thing, a future functioning thing is thus present and cannot be future. The commentary explains that if, according to proponents of permanent time, future things exist, it follows that the future pot is present because of already being having the character of a future substantially existent thing, or exist as a substance. If something exists as a substantially established entity, it must be present, since it has been produced and has not disintegrated. If this follows, we haven't gotten that. Dunno. Dunno.
有些人说，退毛我觉得呢，毛王比我远了，毛王比我的碰比我他就得做他，是吧？看的是呢，今天看个钱呢，毛王比再进我大队呢，我就提起去看个钱呢，毛王大队呢就提起了我，是吧？
So then, according to these proponents of time, saying that the time is real, in your view, then a future thing, if it exists, then it would necessarily have to exist in the present. That would occur because it's something that's substantially existent. Necessarily has to occur as a present phenomenon.
这是给我呢，这是给我的呢，这是给我的呢，给了嘛些把银呗，俺这他我就过来是，这段呢，俺这毛把你都没事把他就要的是。
So if something is existing and with the character of being established as a substance, then it can't have disintegrated, and thus it has to be present. It has to be present. If you accept that, then the future becomes impossible.
Oh yeah, 他这个他那搞了我，这是中呢，他这钱呢，他电嘛我给推送个，这是原来没大把没事把他玩呢，这主意呢没大把没事把他玩呢，毛把样电话约，他话约继续没，看个推个原因了，体力没大你看来是，他吃着不当。 其他嘛，我说，看到我那让个成绩就出啊，那么往后推呢又要多钱，是其他个我让个成绩哦，待遇推那样越是恐怕碰比待遇恐怕碰比推的就送过了哦，往用推那越，他大越推那越什么，往越推那些待遇推那样越，他大越这样越呢，我越想继续推那么几次，刚才推那么几次没。 고와 강기 뒤고 제수 여반이데 미다바니 강래 미다바 미스바타 미다바 미스바타 미다바 대장 미다바 미스바타 뒤숨과 제수 여나 어디는 여바다 치디나 여바다 어디는 여바 치디는 여바티 어디는 여바 칼래 뒤숨 제주 칼라 아니 어디지 여바 강인 바 치디스 여바 치디스 용어 강래 바데 어디 여바 칼량고 그래.
Then next shows that if one considers the three times to be substantially existent, then it's impossible. It would be the case that it would be impossible for things to be impermanent, and this is given in the verse 254. So the verse here reads, "If the future, past, and present exist, what does not exist? How can there be impermanence for one for whom all times exists?" And understood substantially existent here. The commentary then says, if, as asserted by Vaisheshikas, Vaibhashikas, and so forth, things exist by way of their own, and she translates this character, I'm translating this throughout as by means of their own intrinsic identity, exist in the intrinsic identity instead of own character is what she has for Rangitsiniki Drupa. So by means of their own intrinsic identity, if they exist in the future, if they exist in the past and exist in the present, what part of a thing could ever not exist? How can there be impermanence for a proponent of substantially existent time? It follows that there cannot be any impermanent things, for if all three times are substantially existent, whatever exists at an earlier time must be accepted as existing later, and whatever exists at a later time must be accepted as existing earlier.
Oh yeah, that did get 시드니 여방 가려고 했지. 다 대화 제주 가봐지 맞아. 다 지금 제주 가봐잖아. 대화 제주 가봐대. 대화 제주 가봐니. 대화라니 대주바 지신나 대화 줄. 대화라니 마대바 지신나 대화 줄. 다 권도 마음이 뒤래 마음이 뒤니 미스배 마음바 제주 매바 티신도 내비 뒤대 대용 오니 랑공 오래 대사마 연대 마대 대위 뒤대 대거 대와 랑공 오래 대사 마대 연대 마대 대나 참보다나 균전 지지 대와 주로 대와 민바 타스 대와 내니 대주와 대위 뒤라 대와 주와서 인전 지지 대와 주 대와 많이 받아 대위 뒤래니 대와 주와데 대위 뒤래 뭐 타스 미쳐서 유래 대와 주와 많이 받아 대위 뒤래 대와 주와데 타스 미쳐서 타스 받아 대스 미쳐서 대다들이 마대스나 하랑고 오 대사 마대스나 니와다나 인전 지지 대와 주대 대와 민바 타서 랑게 데빌 젤라니 마데와 차와 최신바 제지 단지도 내외시라 데빌 젤라 마데바 단다 차와 최신바기 아니 제지 단지도 내외시라 그 대화라니 마데바 지치는 대화 줄 세대는.
Next shows rejection of the idea that the past is established as a substance, and that's given in verse 255. The introduction to that is, the future is not substantially existent, since future time cannot exist in the future. Similarly, what has the past passed beyond its own, here she has nature, I'm translating that as own character, as the past or not. 255, then if it has passed beyond the past, why is it the past? If it has not passed beyond the past, why is it the past? In the first case, why is it the past? It follows that it is not the past because of having passed beyond and gone from the past. And she gives an example there. So that's the first case. In the second case, for what reason is it the past? It follows that it is not the past, for it is not past beyond being a past substantial entity or established as a substance, but continues to exist as a substantial thing performing a function.
Oh yeah, that's what Mahoma Chirado Kabala. Chirama was such a debakaba, Randi, and there was such a debakaba. Tambo Chirama was such a debakaba, Cheka, Mahoma J, Mahoma J, Meketala Kabata. Ani, Tuni Jesutuna, Mitaba Missiba Tawata. Mahom Bungo Yabala, Hajan Tawa Pavata. Mahom over Yana, Jason Lion Jawa Tawata. Nanjo, many Sheve, Mahom Bungo. 我问我什么都通啊，搞不好是他在进啊，现在他们忙我把这嘛这大呢搞不太了，我当第一年搞不一月边那年，他们呢，看见忙我这月呢，其他他的民主，其他他的反民主，这里头了见面呢，忙我大把觉得气是的，其他嘛我他碰不当，忙我把心里都开亮的是。 碰把他毛比心里开亮的，他那看见毛比碰把结瓦西越多呢越呢，其他他我结瓦没有他是没有把他结了马嘎不行，结了马嘎完了他我效果是什么？他我结了马嘎不行，这里他那结瓦没呢，俺那毛比碰把大把觉得。 这大把人把他什么？我看是马就吃谁干了哦？看见毛毛见人了，其他他盘没去，这里他来见面的，毛大把觉得急是哦呀哦。
So next comes a rejection, specific rejection of the future, and here this has multiple subdivisions. Again, there's a way in which this is accepted, rejection of the way in which this is asserted by the Vaibhashikas and others, rejection of the way this is held by the Sautrantikas and others. First comes the rejection of the assertion of the Vaibhashikas, Vaibhashika school of Buddhist philosophy. And that says that one rejects this by examining whether the future has arisen or has not yet arisen, and there's multiple subdivisions with following after that. So first comes rejecting the notion of the future as it's held by the Vaibhashikas, etc., by examining, investigating whether or not the future has already arisen or has not already arisen. And that is the actual refutation of that, as well as the reply that the rejection of the reply that the Vaibhashikas would make to this refutation. First comes the actual refutation of it in verse 256, and Ruth here introduces that by saying, regarding the Vaibhashikas and so forth, who assert that there is a common locus, that a pot and the future exist in the same location is another way, or have a common locus. They exist in the same place. This is verse 256. If the future is produced, why is it not present? If it is unproduced, is the future permanent or what? If a produced future pot exists, why is it not present? It follows that it should, because it has been produced and has not ceased. If it is not produced, is the future pot permanent or not? Or what? It follows that it should be permanent because of it being an unproduced thing, a thing that's not created.
Oh yeah. That is the Gavatela. Give me a jibala, Kadima Mitana. There are Jiba Yumeti, Tinetaba Jimito. Maomba, Chidamaomba, and Majeba. Majija, Yuji Tadani to Jua Cheba, and Taba Minjure, Taba Mares, Taba Minjushana. Maomba Java Mejan Chi Jibala, Kadamaombi Pumba, Maombi Pumba Midana, 대리 분바야 지바야 봐 많이 뭐 분바 미다나 대리 분바야 지바야 봐 많이 돼 되니 따바 지메도 됐다 안에 따바 연구래 뭐 가시라 미지 받아야 안에 따바 연구 봐야 뭐 가시 미지 비체를 제알라 지바 매자 지바라 가데 뭐 미다나 대라 지바 미보데 되니 따바 지메도 세요.
Then the next verse 257 shows that the reply to that, the rejection of their response to that criticism of their view, and so the others, Vaibhashikas, etc., would say, although the future, they would assert, although the future is unproduced, though it's unproduced, causes and conditions make it become the present. Thus, it is not permanent. And the answer is given in verse 257. If the future is impermanent because, though not produced, it disintegrates, since the past also does not disintegrate, why not consider it permanent? If even though the future is not produced, the future pot is impermanent because it subsequently disintegrates and that it undergoes change, she adds there, why not consider the past pot permanent since it does not disintegrate? It follows that it is permanent because of being a thing which does not disintegrate.
Oh yeah, that did. That you 대화단에 다다와 진입니다 주미라 대달에 현나번에 수방텔에 요마이 안나 최다나 가시입니다 버리 주 가시입니다 버주 대화 테니 다다와 테니 미다버 주와 마인데 다다와 테니 가시입니다 버주 대화니 아니 대화 타니 다다와 테니 미다버 주와 마이 미다버 주와 마레 민데 대화니 지바 미시비셔 미다바 주와 미시비 대화 지바 미시비셔 대화 미다바 주와 미시비 대화 지바 미시비셔 다다와 미다병 원이지 주나 다다와니 미다병 원이지 주나 치시바단 제외 아니 원이지 주나 치시바단 제외 시바양 시바양 안에 미다바 타와 그 죄와래 시바양 메다바타와 주로 내 다달 대 안에 가서 대구래 시에나마 숨니스 다대 뒤숨나래 숨숨숨숨 지내 대마도 숨그냐 대숨나 시에나마 숨니 숨바 마옹바양 마옹바텔라 메다바에 바 마인베 대래시 대달래시 나번에 숨나에 대라 요마인 세대 숨나야 마옹바 대라 미다바에 바 마인베 오라시지 추바 마와라 미다바 메베 아니 뒤칼렘바 미리소
Next showing that if the two times, past and present, were established as substances substantially existent, then it would be impossible for impermanence to exist, and that's unacceptable to the Vaibhashikas and others like that. And so verse 258 says, here the question is posed, alternatively, what is impermanent according to you? And then the verse here addresses their position. If the past and present are not impermanent, the third, which is different from these, would also not be impermanent. The past and present are not impermanent because the past cannot disintegrate. If the present is impermanent by way of its own intrinsic character, by means of its intrinsic character, though it's through its subsequent connection with disintegration, it follows that disintegration too is impermanent, and then she adds a long note there, but I won't do that. Since the third, which is different from both the past and the present, namely the future, also is not impermanent, there is nothing impermanent for proponents of things existing by means of their own intrinsic nature. Those who assert that things exist by means of their own intrinsic nature could not hold things to be impermanent, and thus it would be impermanent for them to assert the existence of time.
마음병 오 대칭산에 숨바 마음병 오 여바라 하장 타와 담바니 하장 타와 담바니 괜히 가정아여나 제신나 참마마 걔남 주원이 로미주 세야지 다 가대 마음바原来还得忙我也得原来去这位些人嘛这原来去这位些人没那这原来去这我马上我那没把木下去不叫没多钱呐我看是去这话的呢看见俺的这位看见这位俺的在水源呐是在水源呐是天天看见我看是去这吧天天看见俺源呐是在水源呐军人体去让心都没让个参与做没完了我呢就为七百多心我呢就为七百多心就没都开两把那么今天开两把那么今天我就没都让心去准备错呢老爸们就把心啊老爸们就把医生了让心去错嘛天天去去老太是开两把呢我们就让心准备错呢老爸们就把心啊在那个嘛话，你的七级老爸们就话嘛的七级老头嘛话，人的嘛话你七级老人的同样嘛都被错他们家当搞一切了，是吧？Yeah.
Next shows a demonstration that the idea of future things as well, if they existed as substantially existent as some of the proponents of this view hold, then all sorts of extreme, unacceptable consequences would occur. And this is given in verse 259. The introduction to this would be here. These proponents of she has it as Niyativadins. This is people who assert that things happen just due to fate or predestination, actually. Future things exist because they are produced later when the conditions obtain. That which is previously not existent, like a barren woman's child, will not be produced later. And the reply to that is, if a thing which will be produced later exists beforehand, the contention of the Niyativadins, proponents of predestination or fate, would not be erroneous, would not be wrong, which is unacceptable to a Buddhist. If a thing to be produced later is substantially existent prior to its production, the contention that things are inherently established as causeless, held by the Niyativadins, and those asserting that things are not created by people's activity and are without cause, is not erroneous. Yet their assertions are wrong, for they contradict everything that is both seen and unseen.
Oh yeah, that's what. 毛病我原来接下来叫我台湾的，刚是中华车把的，我有接下没的，看的要把解决了，接下把样中华去路是，我把再说原来，我看是去中华车把的是，这边我是再说原接把的，俺你没的是，这边我是再说原那。俺那我要把气叫我去哪是，我的叫我气叫我去哪，俺那健身把样那样，俺那叫我去哪，健身那样去哪，我没被吃当，就让你给太怕都拐弯，但就让你给太怕都俺那叫拐弯，肉就被khó没人把他就被吃了是，哦呀。
Next comes showing that if the things existed as future, then it would occur that they'd already have been created, already arisen. I'm sorry, and they would have to arise again. That something that's already arisen would have to arise again if things existed substantially or as real things existing in the future. So this is given in verse 260. To say something which will be made to occur already exists is unreasonable. If that which exists is produced, what has been produced will arise again. Moreover, even if the future were substantially existent, it would be unreasonable to say that a thing which will be made to occur later is substantially existent prior to its production. If that which already exists is produced later, what has already been produced will come into existence again, which is purposeless, meaningless. As a consequence, the effect would find no opportunity for production, since the cause must reproduce itself until the end.
Oh yeah. Well, maybe check me, but started. No, nanju many shave, Maton, Maon, most the Toma Gabala, more than Maon, but Jesuana, said to Miguel Thomas of Gomeba Tower, without the giving out the Gawa. That Hambo de la Muetela, Maon by Muetana, or Meba Chimiton. Kala Maon, you but tell her you're my in, said the guitar, Maon by Yeti. Maon be all of me, but Nanjo, many she show you, says Maon by many she show you sit down. Maon by Loon, but none she take one at Tommy says. Maon by your own and what it or Tommy says. She take one at the Tommy said. Mosam you pull a tape, Mrs. or Jen, Senas. And the car said, giving out of Never na Maon by over, you was the Tona. Gotcha, Jenny. Giving out of Never na Maon be over, you was the Tona, or me but she made a Tomata. Oh, down on but Tom Balang, one you to not Toma don't like Chapa take Maris. Mebala, and Tommy don't get Chapa made a shame. There, my word, I'm going to you about Tella, near what they do. Or the Tanju, la, to some tender Rashi, never care them by near what made it. And there's Sanjay Kawas, Chili, part of the children, all of them, Tadang was to Shiba in that Manasheva, and the chicken on Maris. Oh, yeah.
So then next comes a rejection of the idea that yoginis are able to see things with direct perception, of future things, things that they aspire to know out of their wish to understand them, and that has multiple subdivisions. The actual refutation of that, and then so that's the first point, and that's given in verse 261. Here it says, someone might assert the future exists because there is yogic perception of wished-for objects, which focuses on future things, and because predictions concerning the future are later to turn out just as predicted. This is impossible in relation to a barren woman's child, a non-existent object. And then the answer to that is that, given in the first half of verse 261, if future things are seen, why is the non-existent not seen? If future things are directly perceived by way of their own character, by means of their own intrinsic character, in the period before their production, why are non-existent things not seen? So here the key qualification is that where it says perceived by way of their own entity or by means of their own intrinsic nature, own intrinsic character. So here the application of the thing to be negated, intrinsic existence, is applied. Otherwise, this won't work, this discussion. So why are non-existent things not seen? It follows that they would be seen, for it is not feasible to make distinctions between what is seen and not seen with regard to that which is non-existent. Something that's totally non-existent, you can't say you see it or you don't see it. It's not an object. Such fallacies arise for those who assert that the past and future exist by means of their own, by means of intrinsic nature or intrinsic character, but no fallacies accrue to us, who assert the three times as dependently arising dependently, or as dependent originations, devoid of intrinsic nature or intrinsic existence. So that fault doesn't apply to us. Buddha's Buddhas directly perceive in the present, even those things which will occur after 10 million eons. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We'll stop there for now. It's a place to stop.
Yeah.
Sashi